Hello friends, and welcome back to the Nexus universe. I hope you all are doing well. So let's dive into an interesting story of what if Naruto becomes the fire shadow of fairy tale. Now without any more delay, let's begin the story. Welcome to Earthland. Somewhere deep in the forests of Fire Country. Let's have a chat, shall we, Naruto-kun? Stopping his forward momentum, the almost 17-year-old blonde came to an abrupt halt as the madman known as Uchiha Madara slowly materialized in front of him. Gritting his teeth, he watched as the man finished his transformation, then proceeded to casually lean against a nearby tree trunk, arms crossed over his chest. What? No hello from you. That makes me a little sad. Why would I want to talk to you? You're the reason behind the fourth grade shinobi war. And because of you Sasuke has been twisted so badly I can't even recognize him. Madara chuckled from behind his mask. While it is true that I started the war, in regards to Sasuke, I merely opened the boy's eyes. He was already walking down the path, I just cleared the debris from it. Naruto simply glowered at the man in front of him. The fourth great shinobi war had been going on for almost a year now, with no end in sight. While the forces of the allied nations were still going strong, and nearly every nation with a hidden village had joined their side, Madara used the massive wealth that Akatsuki had managed to accrue to buy a very, very large army. Granted, most of his forces weren't that skilled, but what they lacked in skill they more than made up for in numbers. Madara was willing to pay anyone even to pick up a pitchfork and merely impede or delay the progress of the shinobi forces, and many were willing to do what they could for a little bit of coin. Anyone with a grudge against a shinobi of any kind was willingly flocking to Madara's banner of forced peace. Still not talking. I don't know what else to say, Naruto-kun. I could tell you that it's a little irritating that you insist on destroying all of my bases, but it only takes me a couple days to get a new one set up, so it's nothing more than an inconvenience. Every time you make a new one, I'll burn it to the ground. You can count on it. Madara chuckled again. This boy certainly had change. The hardships of war had a habit of doing that. He'd seen more wars than he'd like in his artificially extended lifetime, but he knew better than anyone that sometimes war was necessary if you wanted to bring about change, especially big change. Well, I'd like this base to last a little longer than a week, if at all possible. I put extra care into the paint job, this time. Allow an old man to enjoy his work for a little bit before it gets destroyed, please. The blonde found his hands clenching into fists. Madara was up to something. It had been many months since the man had appeared in front of him. The last time he had appeared, it was to tease the teenager by saying he had sent forces to go level the Mist Village if the boy wouldn't hand himself over. Naruto had immediately taken off in that direction of water, using Sage Mode to accelerate his travel, only to find that Mist was merely under siege and had not quite been breached yet. Naruto wasn't sure if Madara had intentionally misled him, or even Madara had underestimated the ferocity of the Mist Shinobi under their newest Mizukage, Terumi Mei. I'll consider it, but what are you planning on teasing me about this time? You never appear in front of me unless you're planning something. He heard Madara let out a few exaggerated sniffles as one hand rubbed back and forth under the eye hole in his mask. Naruto-kun. You're growing up so fast, you catch on so quick now, I'm so proud. Cut the crap, Madara. Naruto's voice was gaining a gravelly edge, as it had started to do when he got angry. The Kyuubi had long since been conquered inside him, and he had free access to its chakra. However, the fox still got a kick out of prodding him with just the right thing to make him angry. Even though it would no longer attempt to control him, the Kyuubi was still a separate entity that existed inside of him, and it had its own consciousness. It also had many, many opinions to share, most of which dealt with bloodshed of some kind. Once an angry old fox, always an angry old fox. The Uchiha sighed, then pushed forward from the tree he was resting against. I just wanted to have a little fun, but I see you're not up for any games. Why the hell would I want to play games with you, bastard? Because of you, people who would otherwise be innocent are dying. Madara looked away from the teen for a second, up towards the sky. He shrugged as he looked back down. Separating the wheat from the chaff, that's all. Only the strong deserve to witness the paradise I will bring to them. Naruto only felt his anger growing, and was well aware of the Kyuubi laughing somewhere deep in his subconscious. You're insane. Not really. I've just had a long time to think. A really long time. Now, I guess I should ask this once. Just for old time's sake. Will you come with me peacefully so I can extract the Kyuubi's chakra? A growl. Never. I see. Well, that's a bit of a shame. You know, I've never used this technique on a Jinchuriki before. You have two separate chakra sources inside you, your own and that of the Kyuubi. This technique separates a chakra source, or even part of one, from this dimension and moves it to another of my own creation. I wonder what would happen if I used it on a space that has two chakra sources as one. Naruto crouched down into a combat-ready stance. The bastard was going to try using that teleportation technique on him, the one he'd seen used on Sasuke more than once. What the hell are you trying to do, old man? Madara chuckled, and Naruto felt his perception twist a little bit. The world looked like it was twisting. I don't know if this will work, but I've waited long enough for my plans to come to fruition and I'm tired of seeing them be delayed. I can't seem to locate Killer B, but when I sensed you I decided to take this chance. If it works, then you'll simply be transported to wherever I need you to be. If it doesn't, well, I can still make my plan work without the Kyuubi, but it will take longer. At least you'll be one big thorn that's no longer in my side. Madara. Don't think you see. Naruto's eyes went wide as everything twisted sharply then flashed white in front of him. Immediately after that the pain hit, and if he could find his voice he would have screamed. Something smells like rotten eggs. Naruto sat up quickly, muscles and joints screaming at him for moving so suddenly. The smell of sulfur hung heavily in the air, and it took him several moments for him to get his gag reflex under control. Cracking open one of his eyes, he risked a glance at his surroundings. Black rock, flowing rivers of red, huge gray clouds in the sky. While he had never seen an active volcano before, never mind several, he had no idea where in the world he could possibly be. He'd traveled through most of the continent where the elemental nations were located, and the best view he got was a long-distance glimpse of a dormant volcano somewhere in Western Earth country. That he was in the location of several active ones completely boggled his mind. Was this what Madara had intended? To send him somewhere that no one could find him, only to come and pick him up later when it was convenient? Naruto slowly leaned forward, bringing his legs underneath his body to push off the ground. His fingertips grabbed onto a large rock, and he put some weight on it to gain leverage. Unfortunately, the black rock wasn't as stable as it looked, and promptly fell over when he put a little too much weight on it, causing him to fall over next to it. The blonde teen grunted in pain as his shoulder hit the ground first, impacting roughly against other rocks underneath him. He lay there for several moments, silently willing the pain to go away, even if the uncomfortable position he was in wasn't helping matters any. So, you survived after all. Naruto tried to look around from where his head was resting against one of the many rocks, only to give up and close his eyes. Letting out a sigh, he closed his eyes and chose to reply to the random voice instead. If it was someone who wanted him dead, he would have been dead already. It was likely just Madara, deciding to come tease him again. That you, Madara? Where the hell did you send me? There was a rumbling from somewhere behind him, and the sound of something scraping over rocks. That something sounded very large, if the slight vibrations on the ground were any indications. I know nothing of this Madara that you speak of. I can assure you that I am not him. Is he the reason you are here? Naruto started to speak, only to let out a series of hacking coughs. Tasting metal in his mouth, he spit a little bit, to see it come out slightly red. Something inside of him was still bleeding, which was unusual. Come to think of it, he could barely sense the Kyuubi at all. Thoughts of the Kyuubi brought him back around full circle. Madara. I think so. He has some sort of teleportation ability, and he can teleport others too. He claims that it's to another dimension, and considering I don't remember seeing a place like this before, I'm starting to believe it. There was another rumbling noise from behind him, and he noticed that the voice seemed to be growing louder, and the vibrations on the ground were growing larger as well. I can honestly say I have never met anyone named Madara, let alone any mage with the ability to teleport. I've lived for hundreds of years and met the most powerful mages in this world, and I'm certain I would remember someone with a skill set as unique as that. There were several warnings that went off in Naruto's mind at what the voice said. First was that it, whatever it was, it still hurt too much for him to roll over and look, had lived for hundreds of years. Secondly was the fact that the voice distinctly mentioned mages. Finally, it spoke as if teleportation was something unique. Any talented shinobi could do short-distance teleportation. Madara was just really good at the extremely long-ranged stuff. Mages? What the hell is a mage? You mean you aren't a mage? I sensed an incredible amount of magic power coming from you upon your arrival into this forsaken land. Hence the reason why I decided to break the rules of the exile and investigate the cause, even if it was a human. Naruto groaned and pushed his hand back into the rough rocks, forcing himself to sit up again. The voice started talking to him again, and it sounded strangely curious. Your body is obviously damaged to a large degree. For a human, I'm surprised that you still have the will to live. Naruto closed his eyes and grit his teeth, pushing against the ground even harder. It would not end here, he had to pay Madara back and end this war. I won't be stopped here. I have too much left to do. Too many people are counting on me. With a loud groan, Naruto pushed himself all the way up, only to start falling backwards. Quickly moving his arms backwards, his elbows landed roughly on the rocks behind him, but held steady. Trying to catch his breath after exerting so much effort, silence surrounded the area for several long moments. Slowly opening his eyes, he began looking around once again, this time to find out where the voice came from. It didn't take long for him to spot the creature. It was a large, curious thing. Not quite as large as one of his largest toad summons, but still big. It looked like a lizard, and it was gazing at him with what he would guess was some sort of intrigue. Naruto looked down the length of the creature, seeing that it had red scales of different hues, and appeared to be scarred in several places along its body. It had some large, sharp-looking ridges along its back, as well as wings. They were large enough to give Naruto the impression that it could fly if it really wanted to. So, what kind of summon are you? The creature's eyes widened for a second, before they narrowed. Summon? Why would you dare suggest such a thing? I am a dragon, one of the ancient beings of this land. Are you a fool, human? The blonde's eyes went wide. Apparently this dragon was offended at being called a summon. This was definitely a strange place. Naruto's face adopted a thoughtful look. It definitely was not a good idea to piss off his only potential source of information. I'm sorry. I've always been called an idiot, so your guess isn't too far off. It's just, I've never seen one of your kind before, and where I come from, all animals that are your size or bigger are summons. The dragon was definitely looking at him with interest now. Where do you come from, boy? Naruto started to shrug, but stopped halfway through the motion when his shoulders reminded him just how sore his body was. I'm from Fire Country. I was right at the river country border when I was ambushed by Madara. I have never heard of countries with names like that, and I have traveled this entire world during the course of my life. Naruto looked at the dragon in shock, and opened his mouth to speak, only no words came out. It was then that he remembered something Madara mentioned. Something about dimensions. Don't tell me I'm in another dimension, friggin' Madara. Upon hearing that, the dragon began to look intrigued again, gazing off into the distance. Dimension hopping. In all my time I've never known a human able to control such a talent. That is quite a dangerous skill to have. Even in Daedalus, it is strictly controlled by the Exceed, and even they barely understand its functions. Huh? Daedalus? Exceed? The dragon swiftly turned its attention back towards the teen. You most certainly are not from around here if you do not know what those are. Right now we are in Earthland, but that is all I can tell you. Daedalus is a world parallel to Earthland. You could very well say that it is in another dimension, but one that is connected very strongly to this dimension. It is not hard for those with the knowledge and the power to break through the barrier separating the two worlds. But since you don't recognize the name Daedalus or the Exceed people, that means you aren't from there. Naruto slowly shook his head. Now he was just getting confused. So let me get this straight. There are two dimensions that are easy to travel between, but I'm not from either one of them. The dragon nodded. You show no recognition to any of the more commonly known aspects of living on this world, so you are correct. I believe you are from somewhere else entirely. So how am I going to get home? The dragon looked up towards the billowing gray clouds of smoke and ash. I have no idea. Naruto felt his vision start to darken around the edges, and was barely aware of the pain as he collapsed backwards onto the rocks once more. Cracking one eye open, Naruto could barely make out the creases of cave rock above him. It was rather dark wherever he was, and there was a faint crackling noise that he could hear nearby, as well as a pale reddish glow coming from another part of the cave that he couldn't see. Slowly sitting up, the teen realized that he must have finally healed up, because he no longer had any aches or pains. Some of his muscles were a little tight, so he must have been lying down for a while, but otherwise he felt fine. Carefully moving along the cave floor, Naruto moved in the direction where the red glow was coming from. It didn't take long for him to come across a fire pit. The only odd thing about the fire pit was that it seemed to be burning without any fuel. Next to the fire was a small pile of strange-looking fish. At least they looked like fish. Beyond that, the light from the fire reflected brightly off of the reddish scales of the dragon from before. He didn't know if the dragon was aware of his presence or not, since he couldn't see the dragon's face from where he was currently standing. "Ah. I'm sorry, are you awake?" "Yes. Dragons don't sleep like you humans do. We rest, but are always aware. I brought some fish for you from a lake not too far from here. My son used to love to eat them, so I believe you will enjoy them as well." Thank you very much." There was a rumbling noise that came from where the dragon's head was, though it never lifted up its neck to look at him as it spoke. Not one to look a gift horse in the mouth, it wasn't until he actually took a bite of the cooked fish did he realize how hungry he actually was. It tasted wonderful too, just as the dragon had said it would. No fish where he came from ever tasted like this without needing to have other spices added. "You're right, these are great, your son has good taste." He clearly heard the dragon snort, though since he couldn't see its face, he wasn't sure if it was from humor or some other reason. Making a point to finish off all the fish that the dragon had gathered for him, Naruto stood up and bowed to the dragon once he had finished. "Thank you again. I'm sorry if I'm an inconvenience." This time the dragon did lift its head up and peer back towards his direction. "It is no worry. As much as any of us dragons like to deny it, company is nice, every once in a while." "Once in a while? But I thought you said you have a son? Doesn't he visit you?" "He cannot. I raised him when he was abandoned by his birth parents, trained him, nurtured him, loved him. Then the time came, and it was my turn to abandon him as well." Naruto was about to ask more questions before he stopped, completely shocked. What? Abandoned him? Why would you abandon your own son? How could you do?" There was a loud roar in the cave, and the dragon quickly got to its feet, turning around and snapping at the blonde. "Silence, human. You know nothing of this world or the way things happen here. I did not want to abandon him, but it is a rule of my kind." The dragon's large teeth were glistening directly in front of Naruto's face, and its breath was incredibly hot. Still, Naruto did not back down and stared at the sharp teeth without batting an eyelash. "I was an orphan, I had no one to raise me as I was growing up. You say you had no choice, and since you've been around for so long you probably don't remember what it was like when you were growing up, but humans don't have the luxury of a long life. We remember things in great detail. I would have given anything in the world to have my parents there to raise me. I can only imagine what it was like for someone to be willingly abandoned." Nothing was said for several more tense moments, until finally the dragon pulled back. Naruto couldn't tell for sure, it was hard to guess what the dragon's expression held, but he could have sworn it was smirking at him. "It is as you say. I regret that I had to leave him. But the date arrived for the departure of my kind, and I had no choice. If I were to disobey, I could be killed, and if I were to be killed the balance would be disturbed since I have no replacement. I'm still too young to even consider having one." "I have no idea what you're talking about." There was a rumble that definitely sounded like laughter. "You definitely amuse me, boy. To sleep for 3 days straight and come back immediately with so much vigor." Naruto absent-mindedly rubbed his stomach. 3 days? No wonder I was so hungry." A comfortable silence settled over the duo, neither saying a word for a while. It wasn't until Naruto remembered he was staring at a fire that had no fuel did conversation resume. "Hey, dragon, how is that fire burning with no fuel?" "Igneel." Naruto turned towards the dragon's face and raised an eyebrow. "What's Igneel?" "Igneel is my name. Use it, instead of calling me dragon." "Oh, my name is Uzumaki Naruto, nice to meet ya." The dragon snorted, causing small plumes of flame to sprout from its nostrils. "As for the fire, it exists because I will it to be so. It's burning only because you want it to. Correct. My magic is specially attuned to flame. I can do things with it that most humans could only dream of." Naruto's eyes went wide. Hey, that's cool. Can you teach me any cool things? No, why not? Igneal was silent for a moment. Because I have already taught my son everything I could before I had to leave. I am forbidden to teach another until after the Dragon King feast. Oh, okay, I guess. When is that? Many years from now. Naruto frowned. That's a shame. I don't think I'll be here for that long. Oh, yeah, I'm gonna try to find a way home. Hopefully I can go back. Perhaps. In the meantime, however, I can teach you things about this world to help you survive. You'll likely need it. I also want to test and see just how powerful you are. You have so much magical power that it's nearly blinding my senses. Naruto chuckled as he scratched at the back of his head. Oh, sorry about that. I'm still not that good with my chakra control, even after all this time. Chakra? You mean magic? I can sense that you have a lot, though yours seems much more pure than any other human I've met before, even more than my son's. Now the blonde simply looked confused. I have no idea why. Maybe I should show you some of my stuff and we can find out. Igneal gave him a rather ferocious-looking grin. Follow me. 1 month later. Naruto let out a deep breath and set his bag down as he looked up at the sign in front of him. Stretching his arms, he let himself grin. It had been a long and slow trip, but he had finally arrived. Igneal had warned him about using his old shinobi method of transportation. He'd stick out like a sore thumb if he was spotted. Apparently shinobi didn't exist in this world, only mages. Some had the ability to do minor transportation, but it was rather limited and a very unique skill. To say he had impressed the dragon was nothing short of an understatement. The dragon had been blown away, both literally and figuratively. Picking up his bag of supplies once again, he hefted it over his shoulder and pushed open the doors to enter the main lobby of the guild. As soon as he entered, his eyes opened wide as he took in the absolute chaos around him. People were throwing things all over the place, magic was going crazy, and if not for his finely honed senses, he would have become victim to an errant beer mug that managed to sail in front of his face. People were going nuts everywhere, but the one thing that he did manage to pick up on was that everyone was smiling. There wasn't one person in the entire room that looked angry. Hey everyone, settle down. We have a guest, don't make us look bad. Almost immediately the entire room settled down and turned to look at the entrance. All but 2 people, young boys who were glaring at each other and throwing punches, though none of the punches looked like they actually hurt each other. It wasn't until a redhead grabbed the head of each of them and yanked them apart that they settled down, but even then they continued to glare. Hey, welcome to Fairy Tail. Don't mind those 2, they're always like that. Are you here to put in a mission request, or was there something else you needed? Naruto turned his head to focus on the person whose voice he heard next to him. His eyes eventually landed on a young girl, perhaps 14 or 15, with short white hair and big blue eyes who was giving him a large smile. He averted his eyes slightly, smiling and scratching at the back of his head. Actually I was told that only the best mages work here at Fairy Tail. I was kind of hoping to talk to Makarov about joining. Naruto swore he could have heard a pin drop. The white-haired girl next to him actually looked surprised for the briefest of moments before she started smiling again. The master is on his way back from a council meeting. He should be back later today. If you want to stick around for a little while I'm sure he'll talk to you. Naruto. The girl smiled even bigger than before. Nice to meet you, Naruto. I'm Lisana. She grabbed his hand and pulled him over towards the bar, then forcefully pushed him onto one of the bar stools. He just sat there blinking as Lisana noisily sat down on the stool next to his. So, where are you from, Naruto? Turning his head, he was about to reply when another voice shouted directly into his ear. Hey, who do you think you are? Wincing, Naruto turned on the stool only to come face to face with a young man with a pink head of hair. He couldn't be certain at first glance, it seemed as if steam was rising from his skin. He was about to answer when yet another interruption appeared. This time in the form of another white-haired girl who had a strong resemblance to Lisana. Yeah, who do you think you are? That's my sister you're pawing at. But Mirajane, that's no way to treat a guest. Why are you acting like that? This time another girl started yelling, the redhead who had separated the 2 boys earlier. At least someone was coming to his defense. Quiet, Urza. I was just going to tell him that if he needed to paw at a girl, he could use me instead. How this girl, Mirajane, could say that with a straight face he would never understand, but he immediately felt the blush rising on his face. Apparently the other girl, Urza, couldn't believe what Mirajane said either, because she also seemed to be flabbergasted. It didn't last long, however, before she let out a growl. Why would he want to paw at a girl like you when he could have more fun pawing at me? Huh? I'll show you. The two girls' foreheads were touching as they bared their teeth and growled at each other. Naruto turned his head to ask Lisana if these kinds of things were normal around here, only to see her being dragged off by the guy with pink hair. Sighing and shrugging his shoulders, he turned back around and faced the bar, only to come face to face with a little old man sitting on the counter. Hi? The old man blinked his eyes a few times as he looked at Naruto, then slowly smiled. Hey there kiddo, welcome to Fairy Tail. What can I do for ya? Naruto jerked his thumb back towards the entrance. As I said when I first got here, I was told to ask for Makarov if I wanted to join the guild. The old man nodded and slowly stroked his small beard. Makarov. He's a scary guy. Are you sure you want to talk to him? The blonde's face adopted a hardened look. Yeah, with what I've seen I don't think anything can scare me anymore. The old man's eyes clouded over for a second before they refocused on the young blonde in front of him. You've got the look of a warrior, kid. That's not a gaze I should be seeing on someone as young as you. Just what have you been through in your short life? That's a really long story, old geezer. Are you sure you have the time to sit and listen? At that, the wizened old man laughed. All I have is time, my young friend. After all, as a member of Fairy Tail, you can be sure I'm gonna want to hear about all of your exploits in full detail. What? I thought I had to talk to Makarov. The old man winked. Who do you think I am, Naruto? Immediately blushing, the teen bowed his head. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Makarov simply threw his head back, laughing like a lunatic. Several surprised yet happy cries of, Master, echoed throughout the room. Alright you crazy people. Fairy Tail has its newest member. It's time for a welcoming party. Someone get more booze. Naruto sat at the bar, quietly watching as the last stragglers left the Fairy Tail building. It was quite the lively party, to be sure. He didn't drink anything, never being a fan of alcohol, but it was fun to watch others get drunk and totally lose control. All in all, he had to say he laughed more this evening than he had in almost the entire last year back home. That was something he hadn't thought about for a while. He missed all of his old friends, and couldn't help but wonder how they were holding up without him, or even if he was missed. Especially his teammates and Sakura. There was tension between the two of them, ever since her slightly truthful confession. She eventually apologized for misleading him, but confirmed that her feelings were true. They both wanted to explore their feelings, but knew with the war looming that it wasn't a good time. As a result, they couldn't even do missions together, for fear of messing up mission dynamics. Not only that, but he was being watched like a hawk, for his own safety. A lot of good that does when Madara can appear anywhere on a whim and teleport you to another dimension. You know, I really like that sarcasm, it fits you. Where the hell have you been, Kyuubi? It's not like you to be quiet for so long. Let's just say that Madara is a dumbass, and leave it at that, okay? I know you were sore, I was pretty much the same way, somehow. Whatever he did tried to rip us apart, but that damn seal of your father's is too strong and held us together. Well, that's a relief. What the hell do you have to be relieved about? You can't be implying that you missed me. I don't know, Kyuubi. I think without you to talk to in my head, sometimes I'd go insane. Whatever, brat. I'm not here for your entertainment. Naruto. Startled from his stupor, Naruto almost fell off of his stool. I'm sorry. I was distracted for a moment. Makarov gave the boy a small smile, but continued to stare at him. It continued to the point where Naruto started to blush and had to look away. What? The old man let out a chuckle and shook his head, picking up some trash. Nothing. I was just thinking. You have the glow of a great mage about you. I think you're going to do great things. Well, you see. I'm not really a mage. I'm actually a shinobi. Oh. But shinobi aren't as powerful as mages. Naruto actually chuckled at that. Maybe not the shinobi you know. I know a certain dragon that would disagree with you. As soon as Naruto mentioned a dragon, Makarov's face adopted a pensive look and he quickly looked around. Holding a finger up to his lips, he tossed the trash that he was holding into a nearby garbage bin. Come with me. Nodding, The blonde teen did as was asked, and followed the guild master as he swiftly climbed the stairs. Once he reached the top, he opened a door immediately to the left and went inside, beckoning for Naruto to follow. Inside, Naruto found a sparsely decorated office. There were a couple trophies sitting on a desk, several picture frames with some slightly faded photos in them, and a bookcase overflowing with books. Makarov moved behind a desk, obviously his work desk, and sat down in a chair that let him barely look over the top of the table. MMHHH. Someone took the booster seat. Naruto couldn't help but crack a smile, even if he knew he shouldn't. The guild master didn't seem to care, however, as he pointed at another chair and told Naruto to explain what he meant when he said, "Dragon, no one has seen any of their kind for a while now. I think it's going on 5 years. Dare I ask which one you met?" Igneel. Makarov looked completely shocked. "Are you going to tell Natsu?" Naruto's eyebrows shot up. "Oh, Natsu is still here. Igneel told me where he last monitored Natsu at, but had no idea if he was still here." "Yes, he is still here. Can you tell him that Igneel is okay?" Naruto really wanted to say that yes, he would tell Natsu that his foster father was okay. He really wanted to. Unfortunately, he made a promise. "I want to say yes, but I can't. I made a promise, and promises are one thing that I don't break." Makarov's demeanor instantly changed into one of disappointment. "I see. It saddens me, but at the same time I respect your choice and am glad to know that you keep promises. Is there anything you can say?" Naruto thought for a moment. "Not really, but I also promised to watch over Natsu from a distance, to make sure he doesn't bite off more than he can chew. Igneel wants his son to become strong on his own, but at the same time he doesn't want him to die trying to get there." "I understand. You should try to befriend Natsu at the earliest opportunity then. I think you'll get along splendidly." "We'll see. So does that mean I'm in for real?" Makarov laughed. "Of course, you were in before I even knew you encountered a dragon. Your magic reserves are very well hidden, but I can sense something very powerful hiding within you. You have no idea. Ain't that the truth? Not now, furball." "Oh, I almost forgot." Makarov reached out and grabbed something off the top of his desk. "This is the Fairy Tail insignia stamp. It will mark you as a member of Fairy Tail until the time you choose to leave, should you choose to do so. I just need you to pick a color and a place where you want it." It took Naruto 2 seconds to pick the color and the location where he wanted it, and he got a kick out of watching the old man try to keep the smirk off his face. When the task was done, Makarov set the stamp back on his desk and asked one final question. "Do you want to use a code name? Most of the Fairy Tail mages don't bother, but a few do for various reasons." Naruto thought about it. A code name might be good. It would lend a mysterious air to his presence. That could only help in the long run. He had no idea what he'd have to do in order to perform his dimension jumping tests. "Sure, it sounds like a good idea, actually. I've got a name." "Well, let's hear it." "Hokage." One of Makarov's eyebrows started to rise, followed by a grin. "Fire Shadow. How fitting, I like it." Naruto. "What's up? I need you to promise me 2 things before you leave. First, that you don't tell Natsu anything about me. If you remember what we talked about, you know my reasons." Naruto sighed. "I don't like it, as you know, but since you confided in me I will promise not to say a word." "Good. The second thing. Watch over my son. Don't interfere with his battles, just make sure he doesn't die. You didn't hear this from me, but if he were to die, I might break too." "Gotcha, I'll do what I can without doing too much." "Thank you." "No problem. If that's all, I'm gonna head out." "That is all. Maybe we'll meet again someday, Naruto." Naruto laughed. "From the way you've been talking this whole time, I thought you'd be happy never to see me again. But whatever. Just go and do that hibernation thing or whatever it is you do, old man." Waving his hand over his shoulder, Naruto promptly disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Igneel watched the location where he last saw Naruto before a small smile started working its way over his long face. HMPH. Cheeky brat. Master Ringo's mansion having trouble finding something that looks good. Naruto turned his head as someone walked up next to him. It was an older gentleman who spoke, probably in his early 30s. As one of the oldest still active members of Fairy Tail, it wasn't too hard to place a name with the face. "Macau, right? The older man looked surprised for a moment before a grin lit up his face. Hey, not too bad. You've only been a member for a day, I'm surprised you know my name. Makarov gave me a copy of the guild registry to learn names and faces. I have a trick I use to help me learn things, so it didn't take much longer than an hour to remember everyone. A trick, huh? Some kind of memorization magic? Naruto turned back to the job board and shrugged. I guess you could say that. I'm kind of a jack of all trades, there are a lot of things I'm decent at. Mikao stepped forward, folding his arms over his chest, and looked at the job board next to Naruto. So you have multiple abilities? Don't you have a main one that is stronger than all the others? The blonde thought on that for a moment. He didn't really want to give away that he was a ninja to everyone. After all, it was taught from the very beginning of their academy days that a true shinobi only reveals what they have to. It would be best to establish only the basics of what he could do, and let everyone guess the rest as time went on. Well, my main skill is being able to make solid clones of myself. I'm also able to teleport short distances. Mikao's eyes almost bugged out of his head. Solid clones, you say? Not just that, but teleportation too? Sounds like you're pretty strong, especially if you can teleport. Chuckling, Naruto rubbed at the back of his head. Well, Makarov thinks I'm strong enough to go ahead and start taking jobs, at least. I need to make some money anyway if I'm going to have a place to live. Ah, that makes sense. The girls have a dorm, but us guys don't have that luxury. The last one was smashed up by Guildarts, and since then we haven't bothered building a new one. Guildarts, huh? He's supposed to be the strongest person in the guild, from what I've heard around town. Mikao nodded, rubbing his chin. That's right, everyone is still talking about it, aren't they? He's getting ready to go on the 10-year mission. Is that some special kind of mission? I guess so. Mikao shrugged. Supposedly you only get told the details of the mission if you agree to do it. It's an S-class mission, and I hear that there is another mission above that, SS class. It's called the 100-year mission, because no one would be able to complete it in 100 years. At first, Naruto was intrigued, but then he just rolled his eyes, so why bother making it a mission then? Mikao smirked. Good question. Chuckling to himself, Naruto's eyes began to scan the job board once again. Most of the jobs seemed rather simple, there was maybe one or two that would even compare to a C rank back home. Even the reward amounts were mediocre at best. He'd been through some shops in the town earlier to check and see what the prices for items looked like in this dimension. Compared to the mission rewards he saw on the board now, it didn't seem like he would be too pressed for money here. You know, if you wait until about noon, that's when more missions are posted on the board and you might find something better. Naruto turned his head to his other side, to see who was talking to him now. There was a boy standing next to him that looked to be his age, with shaggy black hair. It didn't take long for him to place the name of the boy, but he also recognized him as the one that was fighting with the pink-haired teen yesterday. Gray, right? The teenager nodded at him, smiling faintly. Thanks for the advice, but Naruto scratched at his cheek, unsure as how to phrase the question, why are you only wearing your underwear? Gray's eyes went wide and he immediately looked down. Oh shit. Not again. In front of the new guy too. Naruto watched as the teen ran back over to another table that seemed to have a pile of clothes sitting on it. The mild chuckles from nearby tables gave him the impression that this was a fairly common occurrence. Turning back to the board yet again, his eyes landed on a job request that he had noticed several times previously. It was by no means the biggest job on the board, only offering 10,000 jewels as a reward, but the job seemed simple enough. If he was lucky he could get it done and pick up another job later in the afternoon. Reaching up, he yanked the job away from the pin that was holding it in place. Master Ringo's mansion, Interesting first choice, you sure you're going to be able to finish it? Naruto looked back to Mikao, an eyebrow arched upward. What do you mean? All it says is that I have to clean his mansion. How hard can it be to clean? Chuckling, the older man simply shook his head. Sorry, I didn't mean to question your abilities. That job pops up once every other month or so, and Master Ringo is well known in Magnolia Town for the parties he holds. Someone usually takes up the request, but it's often too much work for one person to complete by the time limit, so a team usually takes it if they want some spare change. I see. Well, with a couple clones it shouldn't be too much work, should it? Mikao seemed to consider this for a moment. You might be able to pull it off. Anyway, good luck, kid. Waving at Macau, Naruto folded up the request and started moving towards the exit on his way to do his first job. He only made it about halfway there, however, when someone stepped out in front of him. It was the elder sister with white hair, Mirajane, and she was looking at him with a frown on her face. As Naruto looked down, he saw that she was holding out her hand expectantly. What? She rolled her eyes at him. You picked a job, right? You need to show it to me so I can mark it off in the guild registry. This way other guilds who may have gotten the mission request know that someone has already taken it. It will disappear from other job boards. Blinking for a moment, Naruto quickly handed the piece of paper over to the agitated girl. Mumbling apologies, she simply snorted and stalked off towards the bar counter, huffing as she opened a large book that was resting on top of it. Ignil had explained a lot about the world in general to him, and Makarov had given him a crash course on guild operations last night, but he obviously still had a lot to learn. It didn't take long for Mirajane to close the book and walk back over to him. She stood in front of him for several seconds, holding the job request sheet in between both of her hands while looking down towards the ground. At first Naruto was waiting for her to hand it back to him, but when it didn't seem like she was going to do that, he cleared his throat. Mirajane jumped slightly, looking at him with wide eyes. It was fairly amusing to him as she then immediately blushed and looked away once again. I noticed what job you took, and this one can take a while with just one person doing it. Did you, want me to come along to help? Naruto was completely gobsmacked, and he knew it likely showed on his face. 1 minute she looked like she wanted to forget he existed, then the next she was offering to help him on his first mission. While he appreciated the offer, he was only taking the mission to pass some time until later this afternoon. Before he could say anything though, another voice spoke up, the one that defended him yesterday. Why do you suddenly want to help the new guy? You rarely ever take missions, but now you're offering to help someone else with one? Naruto turned his head to where the voice was coming from, only to spot the familiar redhead from yesterday. Why do you care, Urza? I don't see you jumping up to help. He's new, and I just thought I'd help make his entry into Fairy Tail easier, that's all. HMPH, well. Urza stood up, and started walking over to them with her arms crossed over her chest. Compared to Mirajane, who seemed to be wearing just enough clothing to be considered decent, Urza was decked out in a full suit of plate armor. From where I am, it just looks like you want to get cozy with the cute new guy. Naruto felt his face heating up a bit, and Mirajane didn't look like she was much better off. What caught Naruto's attention, however, was how quiet the room had gotten. Looking around, he saw that people were looking towards their group and then back to others sharing their tables, whispering conspiratorially to each other. Occasionally he'd pick up the names of Mirajane and Urza in their conversations when he tried listening carefully, but couldn't hear much else. He looked at the table where Urza came from, only to see that Gray was also sitting there with a smirk on his face, and Lisana was looking at her sister with a frown. Turning his attention back to the two arguing females, he decided to interrupt their little argument. It might have been amusing before he'd been hardened by war, but he didn't really have the patience for stuff like this anymore. I hate to interrupt, but if both of you want to come, or neither of you, that's fine. I have a job to do. Both girls looked at him, eyes wide and mouths agape. Urza recovered first, and simply smirked at him. Okay. I was just thinking that I have the perfect outfit for a cleaning job. Mirajane, on the other hand, didn't say anything, but eventually recovered and settled for glaring daggers at Urza instead. Well. Whatever. I know where this mansion is, so I'll meet you two there, later. Naruto turned on his heel and waved over his shoulder as he walked out the door. The moment the doors closed, Mirajane poked Urza in the shoulder. Back off, Urza, I saw him first. Still smirking, Urza merely raised an eyebrow. So? What do you mean, so, I saw him first, so I get first dibs? I'm not going to let someone as hot as him get away. Urza's smirk turned into a look of disgust. You're starting to sound like Kana. What are you going to do if he's weak like the last few boys you've been through? Leave him with the trash, just like all the others? I'm tired of seeing you gobble people up and spit them out. Mirajane sneered at Urza, but instead of choosing to reply she simply huffed and stormed out of the building. Urza looked around the room, only to see most people giving her odd looks, before she left as well. Naruto looked up at the mansion in front of him, It was definitely a lot larger than it looked on the paper. Still, it shouldn't be too difficult to finish cleaning in a decent amount of time with enough of his clones. Smiling to himself, he rang the buzzer next to the elaborate door and waited. It didn't take long for the door to open, and he was greeted by a butler who looked to be even taller than the door. He had to look straight up just to see the man's face. Of course that was difficult as well, as the butler never looked down at him either, but seemed to always be looking up too. Naruto couldn't help but wonder how the man didn't trip over anything. He was let inside the grand foyer, and held himself back from letting out a large whistle. There was a large chandelier in the middle of the room hanging down, and there were pictures and mirrors covering the walls. It would definitely be interesting cleaning this place. Ah yes. You must be the person from Fairy Tail, are you not? We just got notice that our request had been accepted. Very good, yes, very good indeed. Naruto looked to his left, to see a very short, round man walk out of a doorway into the foyer. Well, not so much walk as much as waddle. He was a very portly fellow wearing a top hat that was as tall as he was wide, and was holding a monocle up to his face as he inspected Naruto up and down. My, such a strapping young fellow. I say, you look like you know how to get a job done. Well, all you have to do is make sure that you clean the entire house for me. Not a speck of dust, not a crumb on the kitchen floor, not a smudge on a mirror. You can do that, can you not? Of course. Naruto scratched his head as he tried to smile. He did not know what was up with this guy. The way he was talking was strange enough, but other than that it was his appearance. He didn't know that humans could physically hold the shape of a ball with legs. Good. Yes, very good. Well, get a move on then, the dust won't clean itself. Ha. Yes, I crack myself up. Naruto watched as the man waddled back through the doorway, shooting an incredulous look at his back. That was definitely weird. Igneal had warned him that there were some odd types in this dimension, but from what he'd seen in this mansion so far, Master Ringo and his staff certainly took the prize. Not feeling like waiting for Urza or Mirajane to show up, Naruto decided to make a few clones and get started. He was experienced enough with his clones now that he didn't even need to make a sign for them. He just focused his chakra and a dozen clones popped into existence. All right you guys, you know the deal. Dispel when you're done exploring and I'll make more clones to start cleaning. As soon as he finished speaking, all of the clones disappeared from his sight, intent on finding out exactly how large this mansion was. From the outside it had looked rather large, but he wasn't sure if there were any lower levels underground that he would have to deal with as well. It didn't take more than a couple minutes for the last of his clones to dispel, and he sorted through the knowledge they left in his mind. A few rooms were locked, which meant that he likely wouldn't have to worry about them at all. There was only one basement level, and it simply looked like a storage area. He'd clean what he could and perhaps organize it a little bit, since there seemed to be some messy areas. He couldn't stop a snicker as he reviewed several memories of a couple staff members staring at him with shocked looks, and rubbed his nose to avoid a potential nosebleed as he reviewed a memory of one of the maids who had her skirt blown up when his clone literally flew past her. Making the hand sign this time, he gathered his chakra, or magic power as it was called in this dimension, and performed another of his signature moves, the mass shadow clone technique. Dozens of clones appeared before him throughout the foyer, and with a wave of his hand they all got down to work, spreading out to take care of different areas of the mansion. Turning around to look out one of the windows of the mansion, he couldn't help but wonder where Mirajane and Urza were. It had been plenty of time, and they should have arrived by now. Excellent work, my good lad. Yes, excellent work. I have personally inspected many of the areas of my mansion, and I cannot find one speck of dust, one crumb on the kitchen floor, or a single smudge on any mirror. I am definitely pleased with the work of Fairy Tail today. Tell me, child, what is your name so that I may express my sincere gratitude to your superiors? You can call me Fire Shadow. Naruto was trying hard to keep from cracking a smile. He appreciated the compliments, to be certain, but the little rotund man was literally rolling around on the floor in joy. Oh my. My. You must be a well-qualified mage to have such a splendid code name. Well, you certainly don't disappoint. Here is the envelope with the job payment, and I also added a little something extra for the splendid work. Not only that, but I have decided to give you a couple party passes so that you may enjoy the party that you helped me prepare for. I'm giving you two so that you may bring a fine young lady with you as company, should you wish to. The portly man chuckled and elbowed Naruto gently in the thigh as he winked at the teen, to which Naruto found himself grinning. It was more of a resigned grin, but Master Ringo didn't need to know that. He accepted the money and the passes graciously, then promptly excused himself, saying he needed to report back. Master Ringo was more than happy to let him do what he needed to. Sighing as the front door closed behind him, Naruto looked up to the sky to see where the sun was located. It likely hadn't been more than an hour or two, so he'd just have to wait patiently in the Fairy Tail Guild Hall for the job board to update. He was contemplating the type of job he'd like to take on next when he turned a corner, only to see Mirajane and Urza staring each other down in the middle of the street. There were other civilians walking around, but they seemed to be giving the two mages a wide berth. Moving closer, Naruto couldn't help but notice that each of the girls' hair looked messed up. Apparently they had gotten into some kind of scuffle. He stopped a few steps away from the two of them, and it took a moment for them to even realize that he was standing there staring at them. Mirajane was the first to look at him, and she looked more confused to see him than anything else. "Naruto? What are you doing back here? Were you coming to look for us?" Before he could answer, her expression turned sour. "It's only been an hour. Don't tell me you need help already, just for a cleaning job." Urza, on the other hand, was looking at him with a completely neutral expression. If anything, she seemed to be content in waiting for him to answer Mirajane's questions, which meant it was likely that she was going to ask the same thing. Naruto was tired of being underestimated. He had enough of that in his home dimension. Hell, they still insisted on sending people to keep an eye on him whenever he went to the front lines. He really didn't feel like dealing with that in this dimension either. As much as he wanted to remain neutral for as long as possible, he couldn't keep the frown off his face and the sarcasm out of his voice as he replied. "I'm already done, actually, but thanks for the vote of confidence." The blonde briefly held up the folder that held the completion paperwork and the payment in it, as well as the two party passes, then promptly walked around the two girls back towards the guild hall. He heard Mirajane start to utter something, but either she couldn't think of what to say or she was silenced by Urza because it didn't continue. He found himself not caring enough to turn around and see if that was the case, either. "That was so cold even I shivered." "Shut up." Several minutes later, Naruto found himself walking through the entrance to Fairy Tail, his mind a little lighter than when he had left his two guildmates in the dust. He didn't mean to snap at them, they didn't really deserve it, but at the same time he didn't think he could handle dealing with being underestimated all over again. It didn't take long for the entire room to quiet down once again. He seemed to have that effect. He noticed Mikao looking at him with an odd expression on his face, so Naruto simply held up the completion paperwork once again. Seeing the shocked look not just on Mikao's face, but on several others nearby couldn't help but put a grin on his face. Walking over towards the bar, Naruto was slightly surprised to see Makarov sitting on a stool next to the registry book. With a simple glance, the guild master beckoned him over. "So, I see the Fire Shadow isn't wasting any time in making a name for himself. I got a message just a few minutes ago from Master Ringo, saying how impressed he was. Since we get this particular job so often, did you know we keep a record of who manages to complete this specific mission the fastest?" Naruto blanched. That sounded astonishingly close to a familiar mission back when he was a wet behind the ears genin, capturing Tora the cat. "No, I had no idea. I just grabbed it because I thought it would be easy." Makarov let out a bellowing laugh that sounded much too loud for a person of his diminutive stature, and proceeded to shake his head while giving Naruto a huge smile. The last record for cleaning Master Ringo's mansion was 2 days, and that was using a team of 5 people. With this accomplishment alone, I think it would be unwise for anyone to underestimate the Fire Shadow, wouldn't you say? The twinkle in the old man's eyes gave Naruto the impression that he knew what was going through his head. He gave the old man an appreciative smile in return, nodding and murmuring his consent. Handing the mission paperwork over to Makarov, Naruto decided to sit down on the stool next to the man as the details for the job were reviewed. "Definitely impressive work. How did you manage to keep Urza and Mirajane from fighting with each other long enough to get this job accomplished so quickly?" I did the job myself. They were still fighting with each other on the street as I was heading back here." Makarov didn't move or make a noise for several seconds. When he finally did move, he gave Naruto such a stare that it made him shudder slightly. "Are you serious?" Even Makarov's voice had dropped several octaves. "Yes. I'm sorry. The guild master sighed, then shook his head and waved off Naruto's apology. I have no idea what you're apologizing for. You did splendid work, even more so now that I know you did it alone. I was hoping I wouldn't have to talk to those two about their behavior, but I thought they would have grown out of it by now. Well, you're the boss, so do what you have to, but I think you should leave me out of it. Makarov glanced at the teenager next to him out of the corner of his eye as he started writing in the book. Why shouldn't I have them at least apologize? Naruto shrugged, looking over the counter at some of the bottles against the back wall. I've been in situations like this before. If they feel sorry for what happened, they will on their own. If they're forced to, it won't be genuine. If they come on their own, I'll know what kind of people they are. I've always been told I'm a good judge of character and can bring out the best in people, so we'll see what kind of impact I have on them. Huh, you sound a lot like I used to. I'm impressed. Makarov let out a big breath as he closed the book in front of him, then turned to Naruto with another smile. All right. I'm still going to have to talk to them, but I won't say anything about you. I'm curious as to what they'll do as well. For now, get a bite to eat and relax or something. The job board should be updated in another hour or so. I'm curious to see what may tickle your fancy. You got it. As Naruto got up to move to a table, Makarov held something out to him. Curious, Naruto grabbed the item, only to find out that it was the mission envelope with all the money still in it. Hey, old man, I think you forgot to take out the guild's cut. Makarov chuckled as he grabbed a bottle from the counter. No, I didn't forget. You deserve it. Master Ringo doubled the pay since you did such a good job with incredible speed. Since you did it alone, you deserve it all. Besides, you told me last night how you don't own anything but a few supplies you were given and the clothes on your back. It's the least I can do. Naruto didn't know what to say to that, so he simply bowed in front of the guild master, trying to hold back the stinging in his eyes. It was incredibly easy to understand why this man was in charge. He simply cared. PSH, stop that, kid. You're embarrassing me. Chuckling, Naruto righted himself and wiped his arm across his eyes, giving the man one more big smile. Turning back around, he proceeded to look for an empty table. Now that he had money and could choose what he ate, he couldn't help but wonder if they served ramen here. It was almost 2 hours before Mirajane and Urza made their way back to Fairy Tail. When both of them entered, everyone turned to look at them, then promptly went back to whatever it was they were doing before. Urza and Mirajane were both busy looking around the room, but before anything else happened, the doors opened once again and Natsu crashed through. Huh. Mission complete. It only took me 8 hours, that's the fastest I've ever done a job. A blue cat with white wings flew through the doors while Natsu was talking, and punctuated the end of Natsu's proclamation with an "I." Ho ho, nice work, Natsu. If you had made it back a little bit sooner, you would have been able to witness another feat that was just as impressive. Natsu looked surprised at first, but still grinned. Really? What was it? If they're strong, then I'll fight them. Makarov laughed from his spot on the counter, but otherwise chose not to reply. Realizing that the guild master wasn't going to say anything further, the Dragon Slayer pushed through the crowded afternoon hall crowd and sat down at his usual table, Happy right behind him. To his surprise, instead of the usual group, Lisana and Elfman were the only ones there. Hey guys. Where is everyone else? Lisana smiled at him, then gestured at Happy, who went over to give his foster mother a hug. Elfman decided to fill Natsu in. Gray and Kana decided to go do a job this morning because supposedly Kana has a date with someone tonight and she needs the money. Lisana and I just got back from running errands for the master about an hour ago. Urza and Mirajane went to help the new guy, Naruto, with his mission. But Elfman trailed off, leaving Natsu and Happy staring at him curiously. But what? Don't just end it there. Lisana looked at her brother before shaking her head and sighing. It's just a rumor, and we weren't here for it, but supposedly the new guy cleaned Ringo's mansion in an hour. Alone. Natsu and Happy both looked completely shocked. Alone? What about Urza and Mirajane? The white-haired girl found herself frowning as she looked over towards her sister, who was standing with Urza near the guild master and looking distinctly uncomfortable, which was very unusual. Supposedly the two of them were so busy arguing around town that they didn't get to the mansion until after Naruto had already finished. They just arrived right before you did, too, so it makes me wonder if they were arguing again. Master Makarov doesn't look very pleased. As if on cue, The other three at the table turned to look over at where Makarov was speaking in hushed tones to the two girls. Turning back to Lisanna, Natsu looked perturbed. I know that they argue a lot, but what's the big deal? Gray and I argue all the time. Lisanna chuckled, but still shook her head. That's not the point. They are considered to be senior members in Fairy Tail, and everyone believes that they'll be able to do S-class missions soon. They just made the guild look really bad in front of a new member. Oh, I see. Natsu and Happy were both nodding their heads at the exact same time, causing Lisanna to giggle, and even Elfman cracked a smile. Before anyone else could say anything, Urza sat down at the table with a heavy sigh. Hey Urza, what's up? Lisanna tried to sound cheerful, but it didn't look like the redhead was willing to be cheered up. Nothing really, other than doing a good job at making a total fool of myself today. What happened? I mean, we've been hearing rumors, but you know how wrong they can be sometimes. Urza looked around the table briefly before closing her eyes and talking. Mira-Jane and myself volunteered to help the new guy, Naruto, do a mission. It was the cleaning mission that we usually get every other month for Master Ringo. We started arguing about things, as usual, on our way there. We were in no hurry, considering how long that mission usually takes to finish. Since we got distracted, it took us about an hour to arrive at the mansion. However, when we got there, Naruto was leaving. Sighing, Urza rested her chin in the palm of her hand as she talked, with her elbow propped up on the table. Mira-Jane asked what he was doing, and assumed that he was coming to ask for help already. Much to our surprise, he told us he was done, and showed us the proof. We moped around for a bit, argued some more about who was the bigger idiot, then came back to get yelled at by Master. It's been a great day. Natsu had stars in his eyes, much to Urza's chagrin. Wow, only an hour to clean that huge place? He's gotta be strong. Elfman couldn't help but chuckle. What does being strong have to do with cleaning? At least he's a man. He managed to complete a job in record time. Where is the new guy anyway? Did he already take another job? The moment Happy asked the question, the rest of the table fell silent, looking at each other. It wasn't until Urza slammed her hands down on the table, startling everyone, was the silence broken. I'm going to go ask Master where Naruto is. I can't believe I made a total fool of myself in front of a new member. I must go find him and apologize, then let him hit me for not appreciating him as I should have. As Urza got up and swiftly stormed off, Lisanna pinched the bridge of her nose and groaned. Hit her? Why does he have to hit her? Does she like getting hit or something? Lisanna glared at Happy, who simply gave her a fishy grin. If a tree falls in the forest, Naruto smiled as the landlord handed him the key to his own small apartment. The elderly man was impressed with Naruto wanting to be on his own at such a young age, and was even more surprised when the blonde refused the discount that he was willing to offer. The apartment was a simple room with no real amenities, and as a result was cheap to begin with, so Naruto felt the discount was unnecessary. He only needed the apartment for a short time as a place to rest and relax when he wasn't doing jobs. Makarov had offered to let him bunk in the basement of the guild hall, which he had done for the first night, but the guild master was being so nice to him that he didn't want to take advantage of the man's hospitality. He had been living by himself since he was 6 years old, and had been paying for everything with his own money since he was 12. There was no reason why he couldn't manage now in this new world. If he had to be honest with himself, it was a nice feeling to be able to start fresh. No one knew who he was, and he didn't have the stigma of the Kyuubi hanging all over him. I take offense to that. I am not a stigma. Then what are you? A glorious mass of chakra with a consciousness. One that you still seem to have trouble appreciating, even after you've used my chakra so many times. You mean appreciating things like making me lose both of my parents, having my village ignore me for most of my childhood, and causing a madman to chase after me these last couple years? Touché. Isn't mutual hatred a wonderful thing? Regardless of the Kyuubi's apparent thoughts on the matter, it really was nice to be starting over. He missed his home, certainly, and would begin looking for ways to get back as soon as he could, but there wasn't anything stopping him from trying to enjoy his time in this dimension as much as he could. Thinking back to his new temporary apartment, he had a clone go back up to the room and drop off his bag of supplies. He had picked up another job from the board in the guild before he went apartment hunting, and had grabbed one that he would be able to finish in a short amount of time. A construction company had gotten a build order, but they were lacking on the lumber needed to fulfill the order within the allotted time frame. As a result, they put in a request at the guild for someone to bring them the logs they needed. The faster the delivery, the better the pay. If he could finish it on the first day, it would be another 35,000 jewels in his pocket. Heck, he wouldn't even need the full day. A couple hours at most should be enough to finish the job. If he was lucky, he might even have enough time to finish one more job today as well. Most of the missions he'd seen so far seemed like a cakewalk. If only the D-rank missions back home paid this well. Naruto. The blonde stopped walking as he heard his name, and turned around to look at the person who was calling for him. Urza promptly came running up to him, and bent over slightly with her hands on her knees, panting. You know, it might be easier to run if you weren't wearing that heavy-looking suit of armor. The redhead simply stared at him for a moment as if he had just uttered the most brilliant thing in the world. Shaking her head, she muttered some words that he didn't understand, then glowed for a couple seconds. In not much more time than it took him to blink, she had changed into much more casual clothing. She was now wearing a blouse that ended just above her knees and jeans underneath. In fact, since she changed her clothes, Naruto reminded himself that he'd need to get his own change of clothes soon. His current Junin outfit was getting a little worn out from being used and washed every day over the past month, and even his vest was needing some patchwork. Putting that out of his mind for now, he focused on Urza, who seemed to finally be catching her breath. Is there something I can help you with? Urza shook her head, then stood up straight and promptly bowed in front of him. I wish to apologize for acting like a fool in front of you earlier. Did Makarov send you to apologize to me, or something? Urza stood back up, looking confused. No, why should he have to? I was wrong, and I came to say I was sorry. Naruto let a ghost of a smile cross his face. I see. Well, apology accepted then. I also want to apologize for being a lot more blunt and cold than I probably should have been with a new guildmate. The redhead simply waved it off. You don't have to apologize for that, it was deserved. In fact, I think you should hit me for the way I acted to you. I am your superior in the guild, and I should have known better. Naruto's face went slack. Hit her? Why would you want me to hit you? I feel it is an appropriate action, and proves that I wish to repent for my actions. Rubbing at his face, Naruto sighed. Are you sure? I mean, I think it's a little extreme, but if you demand it. Standing firm, Urza closed her eyes and obviously tensed in front of him. It's deserved. I'm prepared. Fine then, here goes. Naruto moved swiftly up to the girl, and he saw her flinch as his footsteps approached her. He brought his hand up, pressed the tip of his forefinger against the pad of his thumb, and none too gently flicked her forehead. Ow! Urza promptly opened her eyes and rubbed at her forehead. What was that? Naruto chuckled, grinning at her, then lifted his hand up and made the flicking motion. You asked me to hit you, so I did. You didn't say where, with what, or how hard, so I used my imagination. At first the girl looked like she wanted to retort, but settled on a grin and shook her head instead. I feel as if I deserved worse. But thank you, Naruto. Sheesh, don't be so hard on yourself. I'd feel bad if I gave a pretty girl a bruise. He couldn't tell if Urza blushed or not, her face was already red from running halfway across town. She did say something, however, and even though the voice was quiet, he was still able to hear it. Pretty girl. Yep, you heard me. What, you don't think you are? Urza was obviously startled. She probably didn't believe that he would hear her mumbling. She quickly looked away, most likely embarrassed. You're the first person my age to say that. Most people just think of my code name, Titania, and automatically assume I'm just some monstrously strong hag of sorts. Hearing Urza call herself monstrously strong caused old memories of Naruto's to return, when he used to call Sakura the same thing. If this girl was anything like Sakura was, perhaps they'd get along well enough. When she wasn't arguing with Mirajane, she actually seemed like a normal teenage girl. So far, anyway. Well, I don't know about other people, but I haven't formed an opinion yet. Naruto gave her a small smile, then gently patted her shoulder before turning around, continuing his trek towards the outskirts of Magnolia Town so he could complete his mission. Wait. What are you doing right now? The blonde stopped walking again, but looked over his shoulder instead of turning around this time. He gestured with his hand in the direction he was traveling. I picked up another mission when the job board updated. I have nothing better to do, and I need the money. I see. Urza looked down for a second, then quickly looked back up and nodded, as if she had made up her mind about something. Can I come with you? I won't do anything if you don't want me to, but I'd like to see what you're capable of. Your last job was very impressive, and I'd like to see how you work. She seemed to falter at the very end since his expression didn't change when she asked the question, and decided to mumble out if you don't mind, that is, at the very end. Naruto thought about it for a moment. She looked sincere enough, and the other girl Mirajane was not around for her to fight with this time. His only concern was that he wanted to avoid getting too close to people in this dimension. He didn't want to hurt anyone by his departure when he found his way home. If you want to tag along to watch, that's fine. This mission shouldn't take me too long. He started walking down the street again, wondering if she would follow him after all, only to have a hard time keeping the grin off his face when he heard her run up and fall into step next to him. Naruto stopped and looked around for a moment. They were far enough away from the town so hopefully any noise he made wouldn't disturb anyone. He would have been here earlier if he'd been able to jump from tree to tree, but he decided against doing that with Urza present. It would only spawn questions he really didn't feel like answering right now. Well, this looks like a good spot. Do you want any help? I might be able to use my swords to help you cut down some trees faster. Naruto appreciated her offer, but still waved it off. Nah, it's fine. Where I come from, we were on the move a lot, so I have plenty of experience when it comes to acquiring lumber. Urza watched as Naruto held up a hand, and it looked as if a faint bluish-gray hue started to form around it. The blonde walked up to a nearby tree that he had been looking at, and crouching down in front of it, drew his hand across the base of the tree trunk in one swift motion. From where she was standing, she couldn't see if it did anything, but whatever it was Naruto seemed to be satisfied with it. He stood up, then with a loud thump, smashed the palm of his hand against the trunk of the tree. Much to her amazement, the entire tree started leaning away from where he hit it, only to fall to the forest floor with a loud crash. Looking at her over his shoulder, Naruto couldn't help but chuckle at the expression on Urza's face. Have a seat and enjoy the show. If you sit on the stump, watch out for sap. Wouldn't want to get your clothes dirty. If Urza heard him, she didn't acknowledge it verbally, but slowly started walking towards the tree stump while staring at it. I thought you said you only needed logs for this mission. What did you mean when you said lumber? I figure if I go above and beyond, I might be able to get a bonus again. Of course I'll take some plain logs too, just in case. Grinning at her again, Naruto concentrated and a handful of clones appeared next to him. Urza obviously wasn't expecting this, as she began to drop down into a combat-ready stance, only to slowly come back out of it when she realized all the new arrivals looked just like Naruto. Ah. I read your file. Clones and teleportation. Both very rare skills. Sorry if I seemed startled, but I forgot and wasn't expecting it. Don't worry about it, at least you have good reflexes. Urza nodded, then proceeded to sit down on the newly created stump. She watched carefully as the clones of Naruto moved along the tree trunk, using the same technique with their hands to swipe at the various branches, removing them from the trunk. When the trunk was finally cleared, the redhead had a hard time believing what she saw next. The clones stood next to the trunk at various places along it, then at the same time they grabbed it from underneath and lifted it up. With a yell, all the clones tossed the heavy trunk up into the air, and faster than Urza could follow, the real Naruto who was standing at the bottom of the trunk made several waving moves with his arms. As the tree crashed back to the ground, all of the clones dispelled in brief clouds of smoke, and the tree broke apart into perfect square pieces of lumber. Looking back to Urza, Naruto couldn't keep the smirk off his face when he saw the look of pure disbelief on hers. That was. I don't know what to think. I could probably have done something similar with swords, but it would take a lot of practice. How long have you been doing this? The blonde looked up towards the newly visible patch of sky in the tree canopy. Probably about a year or so. My companions and I used to travel a lot, and if we ever wanted to stay in one place for a decent period of time, I was responsible for gathering materials since I could do it so fast. Urza had since moved towards the sliced-up wood, gently dragging her fingers across the smooth cuts. This is fascinating. How did you slice this log, anyway? I don't believe I could make cuts this smooth with my weapons even if I tried. Mulling over exactly how to explain his elemental manipulation, Naruto settled for shrugging at her and trying to simplify it as much as possible. You said you read my file, right? A nod. Yes. I put down that I'm a jack of all trades. To most people, they'll say that I can do a little bit of everything. I have some techniques that I can perform that manipulate the elements. Ursa's eyes looked like saucers. All of them? Naruto began to sweat. Perhaps it wasn't the best idea to explain it this way. The random elemental techniques he managed to pick up in his home dimension were fairly common, and no one would give him a second glance if he performed any of them. It seemed like that was a different matter entirely in Earthland. Well, yes and no. I guess you could say that I'm specially attuned to being able to use wind and water techniques. I can perform various others using lightning, fire, and earth, but they use a lot of my energy and aren't what I'd call strong. The redhead's eyes were still wide, and she was looking down at the sliced-up wood on the ground. So this must have been wind magic then. I knew it was strong, but I've never seen it used up close like this. It's strong, and yes, it can be incredibly destructive, but it will only do what the user wants it to do, so it can be used to strengthen and reinforce as well. How? Naruto shrugged, moving his hands into a familiar sign. It can cool you down as a gentle breeze on a hot day, or it can strengthen an ally who uses fire by feeding the flames. Like all elements, it's all in the intent. As soon as he finished talking, he briefly concentrated once again and a multitude of popping noises filled the small clearing. Several dozen clones immediately turned and started looking for trees without a word from the original. So many clones. And they're all solid? Yep. I'm a one-man army. Ursa giggled a little at that, a sound which Naruto was honestly surprised to hear from her, not that he was complaining. When she finally regained control, she asked another question that he didn't recall ever being asked before. So, how many can you make? He actually had to sit and think about that one for a moment. You know. I'm not sure. I've never really bothered to count how many I make. The most I've probably ever made at one time is close to 1,000. That's incredible. You really are a one-man army. Yeah, the only thing is, the more I make, the weaker each one is, and the shorter its life. If I only make one, it can last for a few hours and can do almost everything I can do normally. If I make 100, they'll last for maybe an hour, and can only do a couple of my techniques before they run out of energy and dispel. Ursa looked around at the multitude of clones, listening to the crashing noises coming from various places around them. I wish I could make clones. It seems like it would be really convenient. I'm envious. Naruto looked carefully at the girl out of the corner of his eye, pretending to watch some of his clones in the distance. He wasn't comfortable giving out any of his techniques. It was way too early for that. But Ursa had come to apologize to him earlier even when she hadn't really done anything particularly wrong other than looking down on him a little. Still, she seemed to be very well respected within Fairy Tail, or at least that's the vibe he got from other members. It might be useful to have an influential ally down the road, just in case. Well, I could try to teach it to you, but I'm not sure how well it would work. You need to have a lot of magic power to begin with, so I'll have to spar against you just to see how much you have. If you have enough, then I'll try to teach you. Ursa immediately perked up at the sound of the word spar, and a somewhat sly grin started to spread across her face. You do realize they call me Titania Ursa for a reason, don't you? The Queen of the Fairies. That's supposed to imply that you're the strongest female in the guild, right? Actually, yes. I'm surprised you know about it. You always make it sound like you're from far away. I am, but I made sure to do a little research when I got here. Your name is consistently at the top of lists, so it's hard not to want to know what it means. If Ursa was at all surprised by this, she didn't show it and seemed to take it all in stride. What about you? Why do you have the code name, Fire Shadow? Naruto looked back up to the sky again. Where I came from, the strongest warrior in both mind and body, and who gained the utmost respect of the people was called the Fire Shadow. Each country had its own version of its shadow, so there was also other strong warriors like the Earth Shadow and the Wind Shadow. Plus, when I got here, I was given a mission where the name, Fire Shadow, seemed to fit, so I decided to use it. Another mission? Naruto shook his head negatively. I'll tell you some other time, perhaps. It's too long a story, and the person responsible asked me not to talk about it. Master Makarov knows, but he's the only one. I see. Well, if Master believes you should keep it to yourself, then I will trust in his decision. Thank you. Urza waved it off. Thanks aren't necessary. I know better than to pry where I shouldn't. Silence settled over the duo as they listened to the muffled noises of clones working in the forest. The stack of logs and lumber was steadily growing larger as they had talked, and Naruto figured that it was likely he had enough to successfully finish the mission. Before he called a halt to the clones, however, he decided to tease the girl sitting nearby, just to gauge her reaction. Oh, by the way, I should probably warn you for when we spar. I was never called the Fire Shadow where I come from, but there was another word that was constantly applied to me. Really? What's that? Naruto turned to look at the redhead with a rather sinister grin, unpredictable. Much to his surprise, Urza simply blinked, then grinned back. The trip into town was a quiet one. Urza had gone silent on the way back after seeing Naruto make yet another army of clones to carry all of the collected logs and lumber. Naruto was content to let her think. He had already given her more information about himself than he had planned on after only knowing her for a day. Perhaps she reminded him of Sakura, which is why he immediately felt comfortable around her. Maybe there was some part of him that would be naturally vulnerable to her as a result. Regardless of that, he was content humming to himself for most of the way back, looking up at the trees and passively wishing that he could be up there jumping from branch to branch, feeling the wind blow through his hair. He arrived at the office of the construction company that had placed the order barely 2 hours after grabbing the job from the board in the guild, and at first the foreman just sat behind his desk and stared at him incredulously. Naruto got the impression that if Urza wasn't standing there with him, he likely would have been kicked out of the office. The blonde felt nothing but sweet satisfaction when he finally managed to drag the foreman to their company warehouse, only for him to nearly fall over in shock as he saw how full it was, and with some of the logs already pre-cut into usable lumber. The man had tears in his eyes as he shook Naruto's hand vigorously, apologizing over and over again for doubting the claims of the new Fire Shadow of Fairy Tail, and promised to make it up to him, since they'd be able to start work 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Naruto and Urza watched as workers started filing into the warehouse, many of which began cheering that they'd be able to start their work so soon, and were looking forward to a bonus. It didn't take long for the foreman to return to the duo, to hand Naruto the job completion paperwork, as well as a rather hefty bonus for going so far and above the requirements of the job. At first Naruto felt guilty at getting such a large amount, and was about to return it, until Urza grabbed his arm. It's sometimes considered rude not to accept whatever the client chooses to give you. After all, you did complete the terms of the contract, and the client has given you the stated reward, but since the client put in the request, he is able to add to the reward as he sees fit until you report to the guild and close the mission. But it's so much. I just feel wrong. The foreman chuckled a little, gaining the attention of the Fairy Tail members. I wouldn't worry about it, Sonny. Most of the bonus I gave you was going to go to the sawmill for their services to slice up the lumber. I just gave you what I would have given them for the lumber you already cut up for me. Naruto groaned, rubbing his forehead. Great, now I feel like I'm robbing others of their livelihood. He noticed Urza frown, but the foreman just laughed outright. Wow, it's not every day I get to meet a mage that's willing to empathize with us ordinary citizens. You shouldn't concern yourself too much. We only have one sawmill in this town and they are currently overwhelmed. Magnolia Town is rapidly expanding, and they can't meet the lumber demand. Hell, I'll let them know what you did and they might even pay for your services to help them catch up. Naruto was surprised, but reluctantly agreed to take the bonus, which seemed to amuse both the foreman and Urza to no end. As they were leaving the building, completion papers and money in hand, Urza decided to offer her opinion. I have to say that I was pleasantly surprised by you today. I did say I'm unpredictable. Urza smiled, but still shook her head. That wasn't what I meant. I'm referring to your work with the clones, your wind techniques, going above and beyond the job requirements, and then turning down the bonus after that. Just who are you, Naruto? The blonde scratched at the back of his head and grinned. I understood life's lessons really well, I guess. If I'm gonna make a name for myself, I'd rather have people respect me with a smile instead of shivering in fear. The redhead stopped walking suddenly, and Naruto stopped and turned to see why. She was looking at him, and giving him a small smile. Is something wrong? Again, she shook her head. Nothing at all. You've just cemented my trust in you. I'm glad to call you a friend. That said, she walked up, grabbed his bicep and briefly squeezed it, then continued walking as she talked over her shoulder. Welcome to Fairy Tail. It's a good home. I hope we'll be able to work together in the future. I've got some errands to run, so I'll see you later. Waving over her shoulder, she promptly disappeared around a corner, completely missing the frown on Naruto's face. It had only been one day, and he already had one person's heart he was going to break when he went home. Why did it have to happen to him? Because Cammy loves you. You're not helping right now, Kyuubi. According to you, what else is new? You know, you're right, Cammy does love me. Enough to stick me with the one being that will never let me feel good. Just go kill something, you'll feel loads better, I promise. I know I'll feel better if I kill you. Oh, big words, little human. You know you can't, you need me. Naruto mentally sighed. Of the tailed demons, why did he have to get the snarky one? Because Cammy loves you. To be continued, and thank you for watching.